Reformed Church.
You know, interestingly enough, we were kind of talking, I think it was last service, right? I think so. When we were talking about how the people of Israel thirsted in the wilderness and how they came to Moses and they complained to Moses. And that was, we were actually looking at that from 1 Corinthians, I believe, but how they came to him and they asked the Lord, they said, have you brought us out of Egypt to just let us die here in the wilderness, right? And that's a really interesting thing to look at because, you know, it says that, you know, the things that they could be almost as examples to us, not as far as their conduct, right? As things like, oh, like don't do what they did from their conduct perspective, but even though obviously those things were wrong that were cited there, but really the interesting thing I believe it's in, I don't know if it's Exodus 34 or what chapter in Exodus, actually, I think I do know, Exodus 17. Can we just go there real quick? Exodus 17. Let's just look at something there real quick. I just want to show you something. Exodus 17 and verse number 3, it says, is it verse number 3? Let's see. And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? You know, and we talked a little bit about how it's an interesting thing to feel the need for God for water, right? That just seems to the American population, that seems like such a basic thing that you don't really give thanks to anybody for that, because water is just something that is so abundant that you kind of, if you follow kind of what I'm saying, you sort of take that for granted. Like everybody has water. Nobody worries about water. So you know, people don't worry about water, but sometimes they worry about paying their mortgage, or they worry about losing their jobs, or they worry about the economy, but they don't worry about water, you know. But who worries about water? Nobody worries about water. But the idea is not necessarily the issue I should say is not that their worry was over water, but that they looked to the God who had brought them out of Egypt, who essentially did what? He saved them, right? They looked to the God who saved them and said, have you brought us out here to the wilderness to die? So in essence, what they're saying is, right, if you follow that, have you saved us in order to just let us die, right? And you see many, many times in the concern and the worry of people, no Christian would ever say that in that many words, right? But have you saved us, Lord, in order to just let us suffer? Have you saved us, and kind of, what is it that you do for me now? Have you saved me, right? And a lot of times what our concern and our worry is, right, is just not understanding what it is that God has done. In other words, the misunderstanding of the people of Israel, right, is that the God that saved them would definitely be the God that would provide for them. That the God that saved them, right, where they were not looking, and you see this with the Samaritan woman, what I'm about to say. You see this with the Samaritan woman in other places also, where they talk about and I'll show you that in a second. In John chapter sorry? Yeah, and I was looking at actually two things, at John chapter 4 and John chapter 6. But let's do that. Let's go to John chapter 4 first. Verse number 14. It says, whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst, but the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain springing up into everlasting life. So there's a bit of a parallel there a little bit, right? Where the people of Israel longed for water and said to the Lord, Lord, have you brought us out here to the wilderness to let us die? Have you saved us to let us die? The woman by the well was a Samaritan woman who thought that she understood what it meant to worship God, and her her idea of worshiping God had to do with the place that you worshiped, right? Jesus responded to her and say, like, you're confused. God is looking for those to worship him in spirit. God is looking for those that will put faith in him, right? God is looking for those that would live by the power of the Spirit of God, and whose thirst, right? Whose thirst is satiated by that which the Lord gives, right? In other words, that every need that a Christian has today, everything that you could ever want, everything that you could ever desire, right, is on the inside of you, or the power to it is on the inside of you, right? There's nothing that is satisfied by God in this world that doesn't come from the inside of you, right? I mean, the manna that would come from heaven didn't come from God that was right there with him. It came from heaven, right? But the idea is, so it's not like we have physical things on the inside of us that just appear when we need them, right? But the power to wealth, the power to prosperity, the power to all of these things is on the inside of us, right? So the Lord said that to the Samaritan woman. He said, don't you know that if you drink from the water that I will give you, right? Speaking of the Spirit of God, if you drink from the water that I will give you, you will never thirst, right? And she said, Lord, give me this water that I may drink and that I may never thirst, that I may never have to come here again, right? So saved or unsaved, people recognize their need to have their needs met, to have their desires come to pass, right? So everyone needs to have their thirst satiated. Everyone desires to prosper, right? At least a huge majority of people that think correctly to an extent, right, want to prosper. For that matter, every Christian that has Christ in them desires to prosper, right? But sometimes what we neglect to see many times is not that, that we don't believe in Jesus, that we don't have faith in God, but sometimes what we neglect to see is the fountain that we have on the inside of us that can spring up, right? That springs up into life. In other words, the fountain on the inside of us that springs up and provides for our flesh, that provides the power that we need to wealth, right? So even though we may read something like the people of Israel went through and not necessarily ever say in those many words that you, Lord, have you saved us to just let us die, the lack of understanding to understand like what it means that the Lord actually saved you and what he gave you, that the Lord put his Spirit on the inside of you, like what it means for us that, Lord, you have saved us and you have given us your Spirit, right? You have made us new creations that we have inherently on the inside of us. No need, right? Because of what we have no need to worry, no need to concern, no need to ever think that our God that saved us, right, would ever allow hunger and thirst based on what he's done, right? Because in other words, it's already been disallowed. Hunger and thirst on the inside of us has already been disallowed. These are not things that God has allowed. These are things that he has disallowed. But simply by putting everything in us, by putting a well on the inside of us that we can draw out of, it's been disallowed, right? If the people of Israel, while they were wandering around in the wilderness, if the Lord would have dug a humongous well that would have gave them water, never-ending water, as much water as they needed, they would have never complained against Moses, right? Because they would have seen, Lord, you have surely given us a well where we can draw water out of, right? But it's in the same exact way. Christians have been given a well where we can draw out of, right? We have been given the Spirit of God that empowers us towards all things, that prospers in every single way. So it is for us to be able to know that it's not for us to think and to be overly concerned and worried about financial things, about the economy and about all these things, but to know that come whatever it is that comes and happens in this world, we still, regardless of the year, whether it's 2022 or whether it's 3033, right? We still have the same well. That the day that you were saved and the well that God put on the inside of you, you still have that well that springs up. You still have that with which to draw out of, right? And the only thing, listen, the only thing that the Lord said time and time again is, it says, I'll read this to you out of John chapter 6. Let's go there real quick. John chapter 6. John chapter 6 and verse number 35. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. So you see that what he says there, the coming to me, you see, is believing. In other words, coming to the Lord is believing. It's faith in Jesus, right? So whoever comes to me, he says, is him who believes in me. So coming to him and believing him is synonymous, right? So what he's saying is the way for you to not hunger and the way for you to never thirst is to believe in me. If you believe in me, right? If you put faith in me, then you will drink, right? You will receive the Spirit of God, right? And that Spirit on the inside of you will become a fountain. So you look at you look at the Samaritan woman and you say, okay, yeah, like she didn't get that. She didn't get that her needs, right? Whether it was to worship God and to have the acceptance of God or the favor of God or whatever it was that was behind her worshiping God, and the problem of her thirst were both the same thing, right? Her lack of understanding of how to worship God and her overwhelming need to say, you know what, I'm tired of, I don't know how far she was traveling to get to that well, but she basically said, I don't want to come here anymore. If my thirst could be satisfied, I don't want to come here anymore. In other words, for my need to be met, so I don't have to maybe work so hard at it. I don't know exactly what her point was in saying what she said, but the idea though is the resolution to what Jesus was giving her is all the same. It's if you believe in me, I will give to you, right? So you will have the Spirit. So the resolution to her issue, Jesus says, if you were to ask me, I would give you my Spirit, you would drink, right? And then you could draw out. In our lives, that's already behind us, right? We have already drunk and we have already received, right? The only part that's missing for us is the drawing out. So we're on the other side of the solution, right? We have already believed. We have already come to Jesus. We have already put faith in him. We have already believed. So do we really have a problem, right? Do we really have something to have a grave concern over? Our only real concern should be to believe, right? Because it is by that continued faith in Jesus, by continuing in the same hearing, right, that we are able then to draw out that the power of God is manifest from the inside of us. And actually, I believe, I really thought I had written this down for you. Yeah. In both the instances of John chapter 6, where Jesus is just teaching the people and saying, you know, I will give you bread and you'll never hunger. In John chapter 4, he's telling her, I will give you water and you'll never thirst, right? In both of those cases, in John chapter 6, they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. They want it. They hear. They don't really understand everything that he's saying, but they want it, right? In John chapter 4, the woman says, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. So they hear the good news, which they really, in neither case did they actually understand, but they want it, right? The world today can hear the good news that Reformed Church preaches, and they will want it, right? Like, you have to be out of your mind not to want your thirst to be satiated. You have to be out of your mind to hear that you don't have to hunger anymore and not want that. But, you know, when you hear it physically, that is a physical truth, right? That if you have the Spirit of God, you do not have to ever suffer hunger, never, right? The power on the inside of you to prosper you so you never have to physically go hungry is on the inside of you, right? And so is the reality of the fact, right, that not only physical needs, right, but spiritually we are perfect in every way. So it's not just the spiritual reality of what we have, having the Spirit of God, but that people that don't know the Lord, if they would hear that there is a way for me to never, in other words, a way to be able to stamp out hunger in the world, they would want it, right? But I'm not exactly sure that the church approaches the world that way. That there is a good news even for the physically hungry and the physically thirsty. And granted, maybe in this world there are not many that are physically thirsty, but even for those that are physically hungry, that suffer hunger, there is a solution for that, right? The Lord did solve the problem with physical hunger, right? He did solve that. It's not like what he did on the cross does not prosper us and does not bring us out of a place. I mean, what Solomon received, his riches did not come, right? Did not come because of his lack of knowledge of the Lord, right? He was made physically wealthy, right? by his acknowledgement of the Lord Jesus, right? Like that, his wealth came, the power to his wealth came from God, right? So maybe whatever coins it was that they had, or whatever the sustenance was, that wealth was, whatever that currency was, right? That the exact currency, God didn't rain it down and put it on his front porch one day. But the reality is that it did come from God, right? He prospered because of the Lord. And so it's a cool thing to be able to see, we ourselves today, we have heard the good news. We accepted it. We have been given to drink. We have already drunk that water, and we have that fountain that springs up unto life, unto our flesh, unto our circumstances. We have that already. As a church, we know that what the world needs, right? We have the answer to that. We have the answer to the physical and to the spiritual need that the world has. So to be able to look at it from that perspective, and to be able to see, you know what, Lord, in a time like now, which the time is not so important because people have been suffering forever, whether the economy is good or not. But today, which is the day that we're in, right? The world, more than ever before, is recognizing its instability, right? So in a time today where people feel unstable, wouldn't it be awesome for them to be able to hear, right, the good news of the gospel from a church that's preaching and letting them know you don't have to suffer, you don't have to go hungry, you don't have to thirst, not physically or spiritually do you have to thirst, right? But that there is a God that, Christians don't have to be like the people of Israel were, where Moses goes up and spends an extended amount of time on the mountain, right? And they see and they say, you know what? Whatever has happened to this Moses, we don't know. So we're going to take matters into our own hands, and we're going to create gods for ourselves. We're going to create solutions for ourselves. We're going to create salvation for ourselves, right? We never have to think like that, right? We never have to think like, oh, I have not seen a miracle in God knows how long, or God has not worked in his power. I don't know what's going on, and I'm starting to doubt this or that, right? We never have to get weary because time has passed. But if we continue, and we have said it once and we'll say it 1,000,000 more times, that there is a guarantee in our lives that if we continue in the knowledge of Christ, you will see the glory of God. There is no other way about it, and we will see it. When Jesus looked at the Samaritan woman and says, if you receive what I'll give you, right, you'll never thirst, and that which I give you will become a well on the inside of you, right? He said it as a matter of fact. This is what will happen, right? Now, Christians don't see that exactly play out in their lives 100%, right? But that's not because it's not true. That's just because our eyes have maybe been in the wrong place, because maybe we have been hearing a gospel that's actually not the gospel itself, actually, right?
We hope you enjoyed this message from Reformed Church. If you have, please share this with someone else and help us get this unpopular message to the world. If you'd like to support Reformed Church, you can do so at reforminus.com/give. Also on our website, you can take advantage of our free messages, articles, and even full discipleship courses. Start reforming your mind now at reforminus.com.